Now, I'm sure all the viewers are more than aware of the events of September the 11th, 2001, the attacks in New York. This is an event that received massive media coverage around the globe. And I'm sure many of the viewers here at Revelation Tapes are also aware that shortly after, certain commentators pointed out that there were inconsistencies in the official story. Now, there are plenty of presentations on that particular subject that discuss these apparent inconsistencies, many of them which are available, of course, from Revelation Tapes. A few years after that, we had the London bombings here in England on the 7th of July 2005. Very similar in some ways, even though the actual strategy of the attacks was very different. The feeling behind them was very similar, and also certain commentators again pointed out that there were certain inconsistencies in the official story. There are a couple of commentators, or a few commentators, who have looked into these inconsistencies. One of them, and probably the first, was the man behind Revelation Tapes, Dave Starbuck, who compiled his presentation, Government Gangsters, literally a few days after the events. And since that time, there was Ian Crane that did public talk shortly afterwards. There's been a few DVDs. Alex Jones covered 7/7 on one of his DVDs. There was Mind the Gap, which is probably the most famous one. But really, in comparison to the amount of information on 9/11, and even since that time when Mind the Gap came out, there's been very little that has appeared in terms of in-depth research on 7/7 until now. The man I'm going to be talking to today has been researching the events of 7/7 literally since the day it happened. And I'm going to be talking to him now, live. He's on the brink of publishing his book, Terror on the Tube. And here he is today. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Nick Kollerstrom. Hi there, Nick, and welcome to Revelation Tapes.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Okay, so just to refresh our minds on what actually happened on the 7th of July 2005. Four Asian guys, and correct me if I'm wrong, Nick, you're the expert on this. Four Asian guys were sitting around in Leeds, in a house somewhere in Leeds, and one of them, I don't know how it was, but we can imagine how it was. One of them sort of came up with the idea of, let's go down to London, or let's make a load of homemade explosives, go down to London and blow ourselves up. Presumably the other three said, oh well, yeah, sounds like a good idea, let's go for it. These guys were apparently really into Allah, or really into something, and they drove down to Luton in a small Nissan Micra. And for viewers that aren't familiar with the Nissan Micra, I can assure you it's a pretty small car to be to four grown men and four huge rucksacks full of.
Three.
Was it three? Okay,
No,
three.
They met one at Aylesbury.
Did they? Okay.
Aylesbury,
All right. Okay. So three big rucksacks though, full of explosives, homemade explosives, very volatile homemade explosives. Of course, around this time we had London getting the Olympics. We had the Live 8 concert. Hopefully, most people are aware of the official story. They set off various bombs on the tube, and there was a bus and this kind of thing. So, how did you first become interested in 7/7, Nick?
Well, great. I've been found a member of the London 9/11 Truth movement, and that gave very good context for people to discuss this. And I've always lived around the area where it happened. And shortly after the event, I met some people who formed a specific July the 7th Truth investigation group. So between us, I think we started to get the story out. And for me, a catalytic thing was where I got together with James here, because we'd heard some stories at the official story of the train times.
James Stewart, yeah.
Couldn't be right. Yeah. And we actually went to the station at Luton, and about 6 weeks after the event, interviewed commuters who were really pleased to talk with us. And we were so fortunate we got the official database of the train times from the.
We'll get into that in a minute. So basically, you were aware of the inconsistencies of 9/11. and you perhaps saw some parallels with
As you
with
point
7/7.
out, there are very deep similarities here.
Do you want to go through
in
some of
the way
those
that,
some of those similarities? maybe?
Immediately both events happened, we're informed that Muslims had done it. We're totally presupposed Muslim guilt, and then another immediately after the event, the authorities tell us there's no need for a public inquiry. That happened with both 9/11 and July the 7th, as if the people can simply be told who's done it, and there's no need to go through the normal criminal investigations of a mass murder. The police get informed by politicians who has done it. That's a terrific similarity. Others, obviously, both fourfold events, four things supposed to have blown up, so.
Do you think there's any? Do you think there's any significance in terms of the timing? I mean, it seemed very. The timing seemed very specific in as much as we had the.
Well, the first Allgate
bomb.
bomb went off at 11 minutes to 9. If you're into numerology, that's.
Well, yeah. Let's talk about. I'm sure some of the viewers are into this. I mean, let's talk about if we can go back if we're talking about the numerology, because I always think it's interesting in terms of if the numerology is as critical as some people would have us believe, then there's an argument that we can predict future things, perhaps.
Well,
I mean, in terms of, let's start with 9/11. We start with 9/11. It's the American emergency number for a start.
Yeah.
In terms of if we were to go a bit deeper into it, I'm not going to go into this too deep, but 9 is the number of perfected rebirth. You times anything by 9, you get 9. 11 is the number of the dark side on the Kabbalah, the Darth number. 9/11, the perfect rebirth of the dark side.
Well, I'm a science historian, so I don't go too much into all this, but one kind of noticing there were 9/11 days between that event and then the Madrid bombing.
911 days between that event and the Madrid bombing.
On the 11th of March. The Madrid bombing has deep similarities with the London bombing a year later. And these seem to echo. I wouldn't make too much out of the numerology though. I mean, it's basically physical events and circumstances that determine when things happen. For example, the Madrid bombing happened the day after a big 5-day NATO conference on anti-terror drills that were going on, and as no doubt we'll come to it, these anti-terror rehearsals somehow enable these fake terror events to happen.
Okay.
That is what actually times the Madrid event. And as you say, the London bombs were very critically timed by the G8 summit just beginning, and all the terrific hopes of the world to make poverty history, the Live Aid, and the tremendous euphoria. We were getting the Olympics, and debt was going to be cancelled and forgiven for Africa, and it was terribly critical exactly when that happened. Bush and Blair met the day before, they shook hands, and then...
It was a media opportunity, wasn't it? Surely if George Bush was there with Tony Blair, it was a sort of a perfect opportunity for them to talk about...
that derailed all the hopes of the world, the hopes of that G8 summit, to do something about world poverty, were totally derailed, and instead those two are back on their old script, the war on terror.
Yeah, okay. So let's go through, if we can. I mean, I've just... The description I've probably given at the start sounds like some kind of Ealing comedy with these guys, driving down with their rucksacks, probably singing the praises of Allah or whatever. We can imagine them driving down the M1 or whatever it was, and but there is a serious side to it. But let's go through the events in chronological order so we can see what was going on. First of all, who are these guys? Let's start with that, because have you met the families? Is that correct?
I met the brother of that widow, and just some people who knew them. It's very difficult to get these people. They've been so intimidated. But I have corresponded with the father. Got some wonderful letters from one of the fathers of Hasib Hussein. And in general, these lads were not religious, except for Tanweer. They're certainly not religious fanatics, and in general, very little interest in politics, except that two of them did go out to Pakistan on a sort of jihad thing, a bit like young men going on army training. They did go on that, and that's part of the ethos of where they lived around the Beeston area, to support, for example, Kashmir independence and the struggle. So that would be totally ethically okay for Muslims, and the court case this year on July 7th, they're emphatic. That has nothing to do with terrorism. That's quite ethical. And otherwise, these lads would not talk about politics, would not be interested in it. They'd be interested in, they were cricket fanatics, they would talk about cars, they had lives to look forward to, they were just getting their school qualifications or just having new babies born in their families.
So yeah, I mean, this is the other thing, that they had pregnant wives, I think.
Pregnant wives, with Khan, for example, his wife, his beautiful young wife, had just about have her second child. These were young people with lives to look forward to, who had not shown any evidence of fanaticism. There's no credible evidence for any of their friends, anyone knew them, for any interest in what you'd call terrorism. They actually didn't go down to the Finsbury Mosque and listen to terrorists. They would rather just talk about cricket and cars and trying to get their exam qualifications. And none of their family have any memory of any sort of strange or any unusual source of finance or anything. There's people like, we try to ask them, were they getting paid for anything? Were they into drug selling? And nobody can really get...
so it's a bit of a mystery, that then. It's a bit of a mystery, but one thing we can say is that they don't look like the sort of people that were organised terrorists or that were even terrorists in any way.
Absolutely not. Three of them went down the week before to London and had a nice day out visiting the London Eye, this sort of thing.
So three of them went down the week before?
During the 28th, they did really go from Luton down to King's Cross, and they did really drive down, and that really happened. And it's on proper CCTV. And you can see the enormous contrast. That is real, proper CCTV during the 28th, as compared with the extremely blurred, dodgy pictures we were shown on the morning of July 7th.
So what you're saying is they didn't actually travel down in a Nissan Micra with all these homemade explosives in the back?
Well, that's extremely questionable. Extremely questionable, but they certainly did.
June.
And what's interesting, a year later, the anniversary, July 7th, a year later, the BBC was continually showing that June the 28th CCTV with the timestamp removed, continually showing that in the background to the news announcements. And confusing people. The majority of Londoners thought they had been shown videos of that event, July 7th, and actually they looked at they've been shown the June the 28th.
Okay, so we're getting maybe a bit ahead of ourselves now. So we're just looking at these guys. They don't look like the sort of people that would commit or would go down to London and blow themselves up for apparently no reason.
Especially Khan, Mohammed Khan, was widely respected throughout the Beeston community, and people trusted him. He was a school mentor. People trusted him to pick up their kids and take them to school, and people would look up to him. And his family was consulted by the police, Hasina Patel, his stepmother, for any racial problems in the area, and they'd been invited up to Buckingham Palace for tea at the Queen. Khan had been taken to around the House of Commons. That helped with the Hamara Healthy Living Centre to get it all started. That was a local initiative, and his group helped young kids around there to get off drugs. There was a lot of heroin around the area, and part of that was outdoor healthy living stuff like whitewater rafting and stuff, or climbing up mountains. They were into healthy living, and everything about Khan's doing that.
Okay, so we have to ask ourselves, are these the guys that are going to pile all the homemade explosives into the Micra and drive down and do what allegedly they're supposed to have done? So, but if we can just take a step back from there and say that a few days before, I think it was 2 days before, the London bombings, there was some interesting events in Sheffield, Nottingham and somewhere else. Can you just talk us through those events?
Very interesting cluster of what we might call phantom terror events. Around the whole centre of Sheffield gets cordoned off. There's a terrific bomb scare 2 days before, and eventually nothing's happened, or a paper bag is found, it's got nothing in it. The same thing happens with in Nottingham on the same day, and likewise the little town just next to where the G8 summit is, there's a whole lot of these yellow-clad security people cordoning off the centre of town, and nothing happens. This is sending a signal to...
So it's getting people used to the fact, because I remember as well actually, before this happened, the government were talking about attacks on the tube for quite a while, weren't they? There were things sent out, or there were advertisements on anti-terror, what to do in the event of a terrorist attack. So do you think it's preparing people?
Amazing number of terror drills, and there was the Panorama programme a year before, May 2004, which had three different tubes, plus a fourth one on a vehicle in central London. It had Peter Power as the main spokesman and commentator. It had the guy who was acting the Home Secretary saying, "This bears all the hallmarks of Al-Qaeda," which is exactly what Jack Straw said on July the 7th.
Right, okay. So they're getting people prepared for terrorist attacks. Yeah.
Atlantic Blue in April 2005, that was American-British collaboration, and that was totally security. We're not allowed to be told what exactly they did, but all echelons of the British government collaborated in that. It was a terror drill, and that involved bombs going off on the London Underground, synchronising with a major international summit. That's all we were told about it. Otherwise, it's classified security information.
And interestingly enough, none of these, the Sheffield bombs, were they reported in the press?
Well, it was Sheffield bomb scare. Bomb scare.
The bomb scare. Sorry, only bombs.
I think there's some. And then after July the 7th, there's more. I think there was one in Manchester. There's these phantom scares go on around the event.
Just to get people used to the idea that it could happen, at least.
Yeah, the primary motive is to get people in fear. That's the central principle in the New World Order. People have to live in fear. That's what these terror events set you up for. You give them this terror image to frighten everybody, and that enables these rather worthless politicians to get in power because they can manipulate the population through the fear image.
Okay, so it's about fear as well then, as well as going used to it.
Exactly,
okay, if we could just move on. Outside Canary Wharf, was it the day before, there was apparently everyone was told to stay inside. Everyone was told to get away from the windows.
Morning, yeah.
Was it in the morning? Okay.
Morning, 10:30. There was. This is after they've supposedly, if you want to believe, they come to London, but it's certainly after the bombs go off in London. The last bomb is at 9:45 on the bus. Okay. Then at 10:30, there's this whole lot of mystery reports of something happening at Canary Wharf, and the 3 people shot are allegedly terrorists. And
so there's 3 people shot at Canary Wharf. This appeared in the New Zealand press, didn't it?
New Zealand press and also South London press. And we did also get some testimony from people in the Canary Wharf building. They were told, look, stay away from the windows, you can't come out till the afternoon. And we did get stories about, so something went down there.
And someone was shot?
It looks like several people were shot, by some special force.
But this didn't make the mainstream news, did
Absolutely
it?
No.
It was a New Zealand newspaper, it was a South London newspaper. What do you think the chances are that it was the people that were supposed to do the London bombs? Do you think it was them?
That is the ripple effect story, which incidentally I recommend. That's a nice video. I know that July 7th group are a bit down on it, they think it's too speculative, but it tells a coherent story, and it has these 4 lads, they're told it's an anti-terror drill, they have to be part of a game rehearsal, bring rucksacks, as if they were part of some play, which they don't quite know what it is, and they arrive a bit too late due to the delay of the trains, and then they go off to Canary Wharf, just where the newspapers are, and they get shot. I mean, that's a story.
So in other words, they're playing, they're like extras, like being an extra in a film or something. And this links they're playing along with this.
And this links up with the Peter Power story, which we'll come on to, where he is organising, or he's running
of course,
through.
Right. We'll get to that. We'll get to that in a minute. Okay. So we're at the point where we're on the day now. Okay. So let's get into the nuts and bolts. Yeah. Okay. In his presentation, Government Gangsters, Dave Starbuck actually interviewed someone who tried to catch the 7:40 train. This is the train that these guys, they've driven down from Leeds with all these homemade explosives in the back of the car. They have apparently arrived at Luton, and which also they actually did the week before. And they had a nice day, or 10 days before, they had a nice day around London, and they drove back, and we've got the CCTV footage of that, which people have been shown. So they're trying to catch the 7:40 train, but the person that was interviewed, who caught that train to work every morning, bear in mind, so she knew what she was talking about if she caught the train every morning, said the train was cancelled. Now, what do you know about this?
Well, for a whole year, the governments and newspapers and media telling us, oh, they get the 7:40, and they've got witnesses on the 7:40 train describing these 4 lads, and the CCTV showing them getting on the train, and maybe it was a 7:48, some people said, and then James and I did this research, we found it was cancelled, we got the official data showing not only was it cancelled, but all of the trains that morning were severely delayed.